Alright, so today I want to make a video about this quote from H.L. Mencken. Now, the reason why is because with the whatever, all this stuff that's going on right now, it's pretty relevant. And I mean, it would be relevant even when it isn't, if this stuff wasn't going on, but given that it's going on, it's very relevant. So, obviously you can see it, but the urge to save humanity is almost always a false front for the urge to rule. And that's the problem we're seeing right now is we have all these people advocating for, ooh, we have to keep things locked down or we're all gonna die. We need to have more government power here, more government power there, this regulation, that regulation. We need socialism, we need all these kind of things. And like I say, their guise or their reasoning for it is, oh, we're gonna save lives, we're gonna help the poor, we're gonna do whatever. All these claims they make is just so they can gain more power. Again, just so they can gain more power. And you look at these politicians, especially especially these ones in the States. I know I always bring them up, but they're a better example because things there are more amplified than in Canada. But I mean, you look at like the Nancy Pelosi's, the Joe Bidens of the world. These are people that have net worths. Pelosi, I think, is like almost pushing 100 million between her and her husband. Um, Biden's is well in the millions. His son is well in the millions. And I mean, look at that too. Like because of Joe Biden's political, his time, as a politician, he made his kids multimillionaires. And yet you're going to turn around and tell me that hey, you know, politicians want to do the right thing, all this kind of stuff. No, they want more power, they want more money. And the problem with politicians is that it's not that people are naturally bad or naturally evil, whatever you want to call it. The problem is that as politicians, there's so much of an incentive to do evil things, to do bad things, because the choice is do the right thing, you know, like I say, do the right thing and have to deal with pushback, because doing the right thing, people almost always have tons of pushback for doing the right thing. I mean, look throughout history. Look throughout history. I mean, look at the who was the guy that the Earth was the guy that discovered that the sun was actually the center of the solar system, and didn't I think they put him in like a mental institution and like um, I don't know if they actually did that, but he faced a lot of pushback, a ton of pushback. You look at the Civil War in the States to end slavery. They had to fight a civil war that killed more people than either World War I or World War II. So again, all these massive advancements in society have always had massive amounts of pushback, like massive amounts of pushback, and a lot of people have had to die. So that's kind of the point I'm getting at, is that doing the right thing, i.e., getting rid of slavery, pointing out that the Earth isn't the center of the solar system, has had lots of pushback, lots of pushback. And again, not just to bring up the states example too. The states example for slavery is always the first thing people think of, even though it was one of the shortest lived and on a very small scale compared to other places. But like I say, doing the right thing often gets a lot of pushback. Doing the wrong thing almost always means more money, more power, less pushback. Again, contrary to popular belief too. People are very selective with the things that they get outraged at, right? Like I mean, you look at these people, look at all these people on the left. Again, they basically choose between having a corrupt government or having a government that doesn't give them free stuff. Which one are they? Or you know, having a corrupt government and a government that gives them free stuff, or a government that isn't corrupt and doesn't give them free stuff. Which one are they going to pick? Again, that's the devil's bargain that goes on here. You have these politicians that the Justin Trudeau's, the Pelosi's, the Bidens, all these kind of people that the devil's bargain is, and they recognize it clearly too. They're very smart people. Again, these politicians are very smart. They're very cunning. They know exactly what they're doing, and I mean they know that the average person is very unintelligent, but they're very smart themselves. So the devil's bargain is, hey, if I get elected and just promise people a bunch of free stuff, well, guess what? I'm going to get elected, I'm going to get all my power, I'm going to get all my money, knowing that it's going to blow up in everyone's faces in the end. But hey, that time happens, I'll have gotten all my money, I'll be fine. And that's the problem too. And again, you look at all these people, that's the basically the politician's angle. You look at the average person who's voting for socialism and free healthcare. I guess they kind of one and of the same, but welfare, all this kind of stuff. Again, they always come from the, ooh, we're going to help the poor. When in reality, has it helped the poor? Has it helped the poor? I mean, according to a lot of these people, the poor, the gap between the rich and the poor is getting worse, even though welfare spending has gone up 17 times in the last 50 years in the States. Again, so if welfare and free healthcare and all this kind of stuff helps the poor, well, then why is the gap between the rich and the poor got bigger? Again, that's a very contradictory statement. Now, the reason why the gap between the rich and the poor keeps getting bigger is that the government is paying a lot of people to be poor. And because of that, the poor stay poor and the rich get richer. And not because the rich are exploiting the poor, because the government's exploiting the poor. Um, it's not that capitalism has failed. Capitalism has worked so well that it has made more people rich, and therefore the gap between the rich and the poor has gotten bigger. Again, the problem with welfare is that it's one of those things that it sounds good in theory, but it doesn't work in practice for the simple reason that you're essentially paying people to be poor. And the problem is that personality is largely genetic, and when you pay people to be poor, well, guess what? Your genetics go to show that, hey, I exist because my parents didn't work. They were on welfare. That's how I exist. Now your genetics only see why you exist, which is again why you see so many of these people, who are, that live in, these the housing projects generation after generation. Again, and it's because, again, personality, this kind of stuff, overwhelmingly genetic. You see, hey, that's why I exist. Therefore, that's probably the best way to reproduce. Again, genetics don't care about, social constructs and all that BS that the left always brings up. They don't care about racism and all that make believe crap the left brings up. They care about, hey, why do I exist? How can I reproduce? That's basically the main way they care. So again, that's what I wanted to point out as far as the average voter. And again, part of the reason is that it's twofold. Number one, the average voter is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly ignorant. Like it's not even funny. Part of the reason for that is number one, the government, education, mainstream media, all that kind of stuff is pitiful, like absolutely pitiful at teaching kids. It does little to nothing to improve their outlook on life. And again, both sides agree with this, and for the simple reason that you have all these people on the left who are constantly saying, we need to put more money into education. We need to put more money into education. We need to put more money into education. Like that's all they care about. They never point out the amount of money that's put into education. They never point that number out because if they did, they would see, hey, that number is really high, like really high. And for how high that number is, we should be able to educate our kids good. And the other thing that the left always promotes is that, oh, well, we need to increase the minimum wage. Well, if public schools are so good at educating kids, then why do we need to increase the minimum wage? Because if public schools are so good, kids should be able to leave high school and get a job paying 15, $20 an hour. Like, why not? Well, the reason that they can't is because public schools are so bad that they're not educated. They don't have any skills. They're taught about BS, social justice warrior crap and uh, a lot of stuff that literally is completely irrelevant once you get out of school. You get into the real world, and all of a sudden that stuff didn't mean anything. You wasted 12 years of your life. I mean, a lot of it is like the stuff you like, the spelling and grammar and the stuff you learn when you're little. That yeah, that's very useful. But most of the stuff from like junior high and on, it's pointless. Like it's mostly pointless, and that time could be spent so much better. And again, I don't want to get make this into a what would we do if we got rid of it video because that would take too long. The main point of the video being is that, um, first of all, I don't care about people's intentions too. I don't care if you have good intentions, bad intentions. A lot of good intention. I mean, a lot of people who voted, who support communism and have supported communism had good intentions. Guess what? Communism killed over 100 million people over the last 100 years. You know, I don't care about your intentions. If you're supporting something like that, you deserve to be called out every bit as much as someone who has bad intentions. So that's the other thing I wanted to point out too. And like I say, that we have an epidemic of people who are completely intellectually, economically illiterate. That's the biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems facing the world. I mean, there's a handful of issues, but like I say, the urge to save humanity is almost always a false front for the urge to rule. And that's the problem that these people don't seem to realize, that the things that they're voting for sound good in theory. And that's why so many people support them, because most people are too ignorant, not educated, not intelligent enough to look past the immediate here and now effects. You know, it's a telltale sign of someone who has good critical thinking skills, who's intelligent, if they can look past the here and now, if they can tell you the trade-offs, because there's always trade-offs. Like, I mean, take for example, the government spends, $10 million to create, 100, 200 jobs. The immediate effect, the average person would be like, hey, that's great. The government created 100 jobs. Wow, that's awesome. But what they don't point out is that, hey, would that money have been better spent if the government just didn't tax it and let people spend it, however they want? And I would argue that it is better to just not tax it, because the people would spend it in ways that there's actually demand for. The problem is the government doesn't know where there's actually demand for, so the government could be putting that money into an industry where there's no demand, and thus lowering GDP, lowering making everything worse. So that's just a basic example to point out. But um, anyway, like I said, this is a very important quote and a very important idea that you really need to understand. And the problem is most people don't. Most people seem to think, oh, as long as I have good intentions, which most people do. I think even most of these far lefties have good intentions. The problem is that people's good intentions is what led to communism killing 100 million people over the last, in the 20th century. People's good intentions is what leads to censorship. People's good intentions is what leads to genocide, all this kind of stuff. Because again, the government will sell you, and oh, give up some of your freedoms, we'll provide you safety. Give us more of your freedoms, we'll provide you more safety. Give us more of your freedoms, we'll provide you more safety. And eventually you have no freedoms whatsoever. A government that's power hungry gets in and they abuse, there's a genocide, there's a dictatorship. It always leads to that, guaranteed. So anyway, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you'd like to, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. As always, check out my BitChute channel as well as my Twitter. Again, I have Twitter now, so check me out on there. And last thing, check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. And like I say, at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already.